Today we are going to get a little bit more detailed with the color correction on this commercial assignment. I still have my 2 seconds of black at the beginning with my slate that should start on second 8, and then at the 2 pop where you hear the little beep, it should be the 2 full screen by itself. And then the 2 seconds where this spot starts right at 10 seconds. So that's just a little review. And then the exactly 30-second spot should end right at 40. So if I double click on this is a nested timeline, which is really just this tab right here. But I can double click on that and it'll open that up in the timeline as well. So it's just 2 different ways to get from one timeline to, one tab to the other when you have a nested timeline. So let's color correct this spot a little bit. I'm going to start out by kind of picking what I think is probably my most iconic shot for this, and then base all the rest of the color correcting on that. So I think this one, because we have different colors of grass, we have sky, we have some green leaves, we have our people. I think this one probably best represents the overall color palette for the spot. So I'm going to start by color correcting this shot. So with this shot selected, I'm going to go to my color workspace by clicking up here on color. And then you can see Lumetri color is over here. We've got our scopes, different scope views over here. And then our final output is right here. So let's go down the Lumetri color corrector. I'm going to do this a couple of different ways. Last time we went over the RGB parade quite a bit, but this time I'm going to use the RGB overlays. If you take a look at this blue sky up here, this is the blue sky. This pretty bright, really solid looking color is the blue. So because it is the color blue, the balance is going to be heavy on the blue through that area, which is fine because sky is blue. But if you look at the distribution of blue to green to red, the green is closer to the blue than it is to the red, which means that blue probably is more of a cyan instead of being a kind of a true blue. If it were a true blue, the green would be right in between the green, or between the blue and the red. Who's colorblind in this class? So do we have any colorblind people? I was when I was grading earlier today, I thought, I wonder if anybody's colorblind. There were a couple that I kind of suspected, but I was like, in this class you would have to have, for a class like this, you would have to have like a disability waiver or something, like an exception for an entire portion of this course if you were colorblind. But that's where the scopes can come in handy, because if you're color correcting for something that's supposed to be white, then you can use the scopes to color correct so that white would be white. So you can do some color correcting if you're colorblind, but in fact sometimes when you're talking about luminance, one thing you can do to kind of check if the overall kind of contrast and brightness looks good, you turn the saturation all the way down and look at it in black and white. And if it still looks pretty good in black and white, if it kind of starts to look a little more faded in black and white, then you need to punch up the contrast a little bit. So that's kind of a tip for you also. So then if you introduce the color back in, it ought to look pretty good. So let's start at the top. We need to go to the basic correction. And we could try to select a camera, but the camera that I shot this on isn't loaded in here. So you'd have to, go search for the camera that I shot it on. Or you can just start by adjusting the temperature so that we can try to find a temperature that feels more natural. And you kind of got to think about the spot itself. If you're doing memories, then depending on whether or not you want to have the memory be a vivid memory or a faded memory or a nostalgic memory, what would you probably do if it were nostalgic?
Faded.
Maybe like a sepia tone kind of look, depending on how old the person is, make it look a little bit older. What if it was a vivid memory, a happy memory?
Bright and shiny.
Yeah, bright, shiny, happy looking. But if it's a distant memory, you'd probably go a little bit more faded colors. Maybe you could isolate colors and that. But anyway, so what I'm going to do on this shot, I don't have any dark blacks in this shot, so this may not be the best shot. This little area right here, that's the kid's shirt. You can tell because it's right here corresponding in space. And then over here is the trunk of this tree where it gets darker right there. So what I did with this tint was I actually changed the tint which affects the green channel, and I changed the tint of it so that the green would fall right in between that blue and the red. And then from there I could either warm the shot up with the color temperature or cool it down with temperature. The white balance was actually pretty close to begin with, so if I want to warm it up just a little bit, that's probably as far as I would want to go. All right, so let's see if messing with some of these whites and highlights will recover some of these blown out parts right here. This bit, these two vertical lines right here, these are those bright highlights on his pants. There's not really too much I'm going to be able to do with those simply because that's sunlight reflecting off of white pants. So if those are too hot, then what we need to worry about is our actors. So what I'm going to try and do is get this bright so I can try to maximize brightness, but if I were to push it all the way up so that this blue hit the top, that would mean the blue channel is in the sky hitting 100% brightness, which means that I'm losing my sky. Okay, so that's probably too bright on those highlights. There's one trick you can do, and that is you can bring the highlights down and the shadows up, and that will begin to flatten the image out. But see how much detail kind of came back in his shirt right here because of that? Then later on we can add a curve to it. So we can, darken blacks a little bit and lighten the whites. See, I have to, even dragging these whites all the way down, I still have some highlights on his pants. So there's only so much you can do there. And then there's, the overall saturation. We can add saturation or take some saturation away. I'm going to attempt to do some color isolation because we already have these greens right here, but what if we wanted to try and make all this grass look green also? Can try to do that. All right, so I'm going to bring this saturation back down to 100% and just leave that there. Now under creative, we could go for one of these crazy looks, which might be good for your nostalgic look, your golden western look. Ooh, look how bright that made that. Then if we add some faded film, it'll kind of bring some of those shadows up. But look how extreme all those whites are now. So maybe we can bring some saturation back down. That's super, super bright. Let's try something different. Gold tobacco. No. Neutral start. Okay, I'm going to do none on this. See how much we can push it though? So I'm going to just kind of restore this back to where it was, and remember the difference between vibrance and saturation. If you just increase saturation, that'll increase the saturation of the entire thing. But if you increase the vibrance, it'll increase the saturation of the places that are usually less saturated, which would be your highlights and some of your shadows. So if I bring vibrance up a little bit, I might actually get a little bit into that grass. What do you think of that? Let me put this at 0. And then vibrance up, vibrance down, vibrance up, vibrance down. I think I like the vibrance up a little bit. Maybe we could turn the saturation back down, turn the vibrance up. See how that looks. I think I like that too, because look at what it's done to the sky. Sky's super blue.
The tree really pops too.
Tree's really popping. And if this is like a childhood memory, maybe you remember things a lot more colorful than they are now. Because, you know, you get to be an adult and you get all jaded. And anyway, we can adjust the shadows so that shadows and highlights, so that if we wanted to, we could shift the shadows a little bit more to these yellows to even kind of warm this image up even more without necessarily changing the hue of the entire thing. Because if we shifted everything yellow, then, you know, we would be affecting the skin tones and stuff. Another thing is we could, with that going that way, we could pull maybe some of these highlights to the blue side. Then that'll really accentuate more of this sky. We're actually getting some blue in his hat, in the little boy's hat here. And then this tint balance will kind of determine at which point the shadows give up and the highlights take over, and vice versa. I actually like that. I like things warm. I like warm things when I'm color correcting personally.
Like, oh, you have too much warm hue in this. And I'm like, I wanted it that way. Like, what do you think I was doing in Photoshop?
Yeah, I actually have to tone it down sometimes. Yeah, I have to tone it down sometimes because when I'm processing raw photos, I like to make them super golden. But then when I'm all done, I look at the skin and I'm like, wait, they kind of look like peaches, you know? It's like, maybe I went a little too far. Anyway, so next let's go to the curves. And this is where you can, with great control, add extra contrast to an image. And the way you do that is if you put 1 point, now this is with the RGB, the luminance curve, which is the white one. This affects everything all together. If you put a point in the top and the bottom of that, and then you bring this bottom one down slightly, and then you bring this top one up slightly, that creates what we call an S-curve because it's shaped like an S. Now, if this footage, if we had shot this on a really high-end cinema camera, those cameras try to shoot images that are devoid of any contrast, like as low contrast and as little saturation as you can get, but they record the images with tons and tons of color information. So even though the image straight out of the camera looks flat and uninteresting and dull, they do that so that you can push these curves all the way out to here and really make it really dramatic, and then pull that down. So you remember how bright that other creative sort of preset made the image? Well, it probably had a curve in it that was similar to this. See how much brighter the image just got? Again, that's starting to get kind of too bright to look at. But this camera was shot, I mean, we shot this with a picture profile that doesn't have that kind of dynamic range. So my S-curve is going to be a lot less dramatic. And now if I wanted to, I could go in and take a look at these highlights in the blue. Problem is, if I wanted to get rid of some of this blue highlight from his hat and preserve blue in the sky, I would have to duplicate this clip and draw a mask around him and isolate him out and color correct the sky separate from his hat, which maybe we could do. It wasn't really something I was planning on for this lesson, but maybe we could do it. But let me just go to the blue and see if I can grab the very, very highlights of the blue and pull it down slightly so that maybe in those highlights I can make them a little less blue. Or conversely, I could embrace the highlights, the blue highlights. So let me kind of explain to you what this curve is doing. See, in these up, if I were to just say increase contrast, it would push everything on the top half of this curves, or this RGB parade overlay. It would just start pushing everything up this way, and it wouldn't have any respect for what 100% exposure is. Same thing with the shadows. It would just start pushing things down. And see down here, I've got like these dots that are starting to collect on the bottom. That's called crushing the blacks, where there comes a point where maybe people aren't going to miss the detail, and you can go ahead and just make it darker. Like in his shirt right here, that's such small detail that even if I were to bring that back up, I don't know that there's, I mean, you'd have to lighten that up a lot to even start seeing anything in his shirt. So what we go for is everything outside here. Now this image might be a little bit dark still, and in that situation I would kind of go back up here and raise the shadows a little bit more so that I can get even more detail in these shirts. And then if I bring the highlights down, then I can go back to my curves and add even more curvature, because what this is doing is tapering off those whites. So even though I'm brightening everything in this area, this curve is actually keeping it from pushing it up over 100%. So you can lighten and brighten an image without necessarily smashing the whites or crushing the blacks. Smashing the whites is something I just made up. All right, so that's looking pretty bright. Let's see now if we can, in this hue saturation curve, okay, so one thing I can do is I can possibly go in here and isolate either this grass or maybe try to grab some of these greens or yellows and add saturation or change that saturation. But there's actually another effect that I'll add that will isolate some of these colors, and we can maybe change this grass to be a little bit more green looking. So another thing we can do is in these color wheels is add more changes to the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if we wanted to cool the highlights off even more, and then you know, maybe pull some of this craziness back. Maybe make the shadows more green. That's way too much. Or yellow. Nah. Let's just double click on these and leave them alone because they're fine. All right, let's mess with the vignette now because this is a memory, or maybe a memory. Let's add some vignette. It used to be that you would have to create a Photoshop file or something with a gradient vignette that you would overlay and all that stuff, but this is kind of nice. So if you take a look at this vignette all the way on, see what happens to the edges of the screen, this kind of feathered darkness that happens out on the edge. The amount is how dark or how light that effect is, okay? Now the midpoint is, let's pretend there's a circle here, and the midpoint is how big or small that circle is, which basically means how far into the middle this will come. So let's just drag this all the way down. See how compact that made it. And also with this cranked up like this to make it more obvious, a roundness would elongate it out this way. So, or not elongate it, but smash it up into the corners, or make it all the way around so it's like a circle shaped vignette. So the most natural looking vignette is going to be with the roundness in the middle, but with your midpoint maybe out a little bit more, because when it comes to vignettes, the test of a vignette is if you're on a shot where the camera is moving around or panning, or looks like it's handheld and the shot is moving very much. If the shot starts to show, like if you start seeing things moving through the vignette, you've got too much vignette. A vignette is supposed to be, oh, I like the look of that image, but you don't really perceive why until you realize, oh, there's a vignette on there. But if it screams, hey, someone put a vignette on that shot, then you got too strong of a vignette. For example, that's too strong of a vignette because you can totally see it right there. If this shot were moving, this tree would, well, actually it is moving. So check out this vignette, just, oh, I can't render it. The tree's just going to move out into the vignette. So that's too much vignette. All right, let's put this back up. And maybe not have the vignette be all the way dark either. Just want a little bit of it. And then the feather is, you know, how much more softening you want to have. So the way you can check this is toggle it on and off. So for my shot, the vignette is doing something, but it's not totally extreme. Actually, I'm going to turn that down a little bit more, turn the feather way up. There. All right, a little more subtle. All right, so this is really, really saturated. Let me go into my effects panel and do a change color. Add that to the clip. And then if I go into my effects controls panel, that's where I'm going to now find the change color. So what I'm going to do is try to sample the color of grass that is the most indicative of all these grass colors. And then, so that's the color to change. We could do a hue transform and try to change it to a green color that looks natural. That looks like Nickelodeon slime. But we can just, you know, maybe decrease the saturation of it a little bit. Take not the lightness down. But if we do the tolerance, matching tolerance, then you know we can get more or less of the image depending on how much of this we use. And then if we turn up the softness, then that'll add kind of a softness to it. Now I can drag this, I gotta drag this way down. Even more.
I'm missing this change color button. Is there?
Change color is an effect in your effects panel. I typed in color to find all the color
Find it? Oh.
ones. Yeah. This is updating very slowly. All right. Let's see. I may not have picked a very good. Okay. So if we click on this drop down, this corrected layer, and change it to correction mask, this will help us isolate the color that we're changing. So maybe what I should do is change this matching softness down to like 5%. There. Now I'm only getting a little bit of his forehead. Let's drag this down to like 3% for the similarity, and then like maybe 3% for the matching. There. Now that's all that brown stuff. Now we need to make it look good. So if we do a 0 on the hue transform, if we go maybe up to 20, that'll transform it over to a little bit of green. This isn't going well. Let's do -50 on that. See what happens.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't do change to color?
That's what I'm gonna try next. That wasn't really working that well. Okay, so let's select some grass again. And let's change this. Now I'm not just going to do any old green color. I want to select something that's already green in my image, like this green. And let's do hue, lightness, saturation. Whoa. Ooh. Ah. Okay, hue's going to be the best. So let's go hue percentage. Let's turn all this stuff down. Let's turn the softness down to like 10 or 3 like we had it before. Oh my gosh. I'm doing terrible. Okay, let's try this 1%. I gotta get it off his face.
His face?
His face is
that orange.
too close to that color. Maybe this isn't gonna work.
So do we have to make our thing this bright, or can we
No.
do our own style?
No, you gotta do it your own way.
Okay, cool.
I'm doing it my way. You do it your way.
Sweet.
Alright, I give up. That's where I'm gonna leave it now. Alright, let's see what happens if I take this Lumetri, this master, copy it from this one, paste it onto this one. Ooh, that sky just popped like crazy. Their skin just went nuts too.
Sunburned.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to do something. So it worked for that far away shot, but not this one, obviously. All right, so let's go. Wow, there's the before and after. Look at that. All right, so let's pull, might have to start over, but let's go to our vibrance and turn our vibrance down. Okay, so that's a little better. Another thing I did was I messed with the color temperature of the shadows. Oh, there we go. It pasted it onto the wrong place. That's okay, that's the only time we're using this
How
shot.
did you copy the settings again?
From the effects controls panel. So I
Okay.
went to the master tab in the effects controls and copied Lumetri. And then I should have gone into the master tab on the, oh it did paste it on there. That's strange though, because when I go up to the clip tab in the Lumetri color up here, then that's where all my settings are for that other shot. So that's kind of confusing. All right, let's make him less sunburned. This shot's really bright too. Look at what's happening with his pants. That's his pants. Let's try to make his pants white. So if I go back to my basic color here, maybe I can get this to, whoa, don't go that blue. This is updating super slow. Some computer I've got here. Ah, that's looking better. So you can start seeing his skin again. Change that exposure down. So the exposure on this shot is brighter than the exposure on the previous one. Okay, I think I'm good with that. So let's go to the previous shot. See what happens when I copy the Lumetri from this one. Copy. Paste it onto this one. Okay, so that did almost nothing. Let's try it from this one. That did a lot more. It's because this is a darker shot. But look at, it's messing around with all these. I actually extracted a whole bunch of noise off that pig. I did too much. So let's go to this vibrance and turn the vibrance down a bit. It's just too much. That's a little better. This is okay because the pig's going down into the shade. You know, we didn't really light this, so we didn't light the pig by itself. So now that's good color correction for that shot. So for this shot, what do you think? Should we try copying the color correction from this or that?
How come it looks so orange?
Because of my color correction. Now that I'm looking at this, it looks terrible. Let me pull the oranges back, pull this back toward the center on my shadows. That's the thing is with color correcting, you do one shot and then you think you like it and then you do the next shot and you like that better and then you go back to the first shot and you're like, what was I thinking with that shot?
That was what I was having a problem with the hallway one. Is I'd do one and then I'd go back to the other one and I couldn't get them to be similar. Like I'd copy it and paste it over and it would just completely wreck the one that I pasted it onto.
Well, for me right now, this is a similar angle for the sun, and looking at him, I think I'm going to use the Lumetri from this one and paste it onto this one. That looks okay. All right. Let me go quick here for a second. I'm just going to paste that one on there. That one looks okay. Actually, this is lucky because this is what I was going to talk about next. See his eye? You probably can't see it quite as well on the projector because that projector is not that great. But in his eye, if I were to darken the shadows and darken the blacks too much, then I would have lost the detail in the color of his eye. Now he's got kind of brown eyes anyway, but as soon as you start losing the iris of the eye, that's when you start losing the soul, I think. So when you're color correcting this shot, see the reflection that's coming into his eye right there? If you start to lose that, then your color correction is getting too dark, at least in the shadows. For a spot like this, I think. So let me try that. Woo! That's a lot of saturation. I copied the wrong settings, I think. Let me bring the vibrance down on this one. And for this one, because of how much we're seeing in this, I'm going to maybe increase this curve a little bit. Actually kind of made it look better, I think. All right, so let me copy this Lumetri. Where is it? Oh my gosh, this is getting so frustrating. Well, let me do it here. There. Okay, watch what happens as I start to darken this. I just don't want to lose this sun coming off his cheek. You're probably going to start losing detail there if you start adding brightness and contrast. The important thing is to not lose his eyes. So if I go to my creative, pull this vibrance down a little bit. There, it's good. Now as long as I go from this shot, oh, that shot's just like this shot. I'm going to take the scope, the Lumetri from this one. Copy. Hopefully this will work. Yeah, that works. Oh man, there are probably, if professionals watch this, they're going to be like, that guy is a terrible color corrector.
You just tell me you're colorblind.
I'm colorblind, guys. I'm colorblind.
Colorblind, sorry.
So while I personally may not be doing what you would consider to be a good job on this, because I'm like, this peach color is like exploding off the side of his ear. There's like blue highlights showing up in his pants and on his hat right here, which is bad. I mean, it's like, it's not, I haven't done a great job. His skin here is totally peach. So here's all the things that are wrong so that you can maybe figure out a way to do it better than me. But if I toggle through from shot to shot, that they all are looking like they belong in the same spot together at least. Okay? And that's the important thing here. Now, if you're going from, if you're writing your script so that you're going from modern day to the memory, then your color correction for the modern day stuff would be different than the memory stuff, so long as all the present day stuff looks the same and all the memory stuff looks the same. Okay, that's how you make the memory look like a memory. Is because every time you see that color correction, your mind automatically goes, oh, we're in a memory, because it's been established. And every time you see that color hue or that color balance happen, because if you go from shot to shot and the colors change or the saturation changes, that's when you're like, wait, do these go together? And holy cow, did the camera person not know how to set their color balance or something? You know. And even if they didn't, your job as the editor or the color corrector is to make the two cameras with different white balance settings look like they were the same. Okay? It's amazing how much you really can do with color correction. So anyway, I got a little bit more heavy into the color correction, talked a little bit more about the principles this time. So hopefully that helps you color correct your commercials.